I stood trembling in the pouring rain. The expensive silk dress I had so carefully chosen now, completely soaked and stained with red wine. Through the mansion windows, I could see the party continuing as if nothing had happened, the occasional burst of laughter cutting through the storm like a knife. My own sister had just poured wine down my front, sneering as she told me to leave her engagement celebration. The security guards had physically escorted me out, and now here I was, locked out in a thunderstorm, while my family carried on celebrating inside. The worst part wasn't even the humiliation or the ruined dress. It was watching my father, the man who had once carried me on his shoulders and promised to always protect me, deliberately turn his back when I pleaded for him to intervene. I had never felt so utterly alone and betrayed. Then suddenly, headlights cut through the darkness, approaching slowly up the long, winding driveway. 3 years ago, my life had been completely different. As Carly Preston, eldest daughter of the prestigious Preston family, I had been raised with certain expectations. The Prestons were old money in our city, with a legacy spanning 4 generations of successful business ventures and strategic marriages that had steadily increased the family fortune. "Your future is secure, as long as you remember who you are," my father James Preston would often say during our formal Sunday dinners. What he meant, of course, was that my identity was inseparable from the family name and the responsibilities it carried. I had always been the obedient daughter, attending the right schools, joining the right clubs, and dating the right kind of men from similar backgrounds. That changed the summer I turned 27, when I met Jackson Warner at a charity gala I had organized for children with rare diseases. Unlike the polished trust fund men in our social circle, Jackson was different. He hadn't attended an Ivy League school on family money. Instead, he had worked his way through college with scholarships and night jobs, eventually building his tech startup from nothing but a brilliant idea and relentless determination. By the time we met, his company was already successful, though not yet the powerhouse it would later become. "So you're the famous Carly Preston," he had said, approaching me at the event with 2 glasses of champagne. "The woman who managed to get half of Manhattan's elite to open their wallets for sick kids." I had been instantly drawn to his confidence and genuine warmth. Unlike others who saw me as a Preston first and a person second, Jackson seemed interested in me for reasons that had nothing to do with my family name. Our connection was immediate and powerful. We spent the entire evening talking, and by the end of the night, I knew something significant had happened. Within weeks, we were inseparable. My family's reaction was swift and harsh. A tech entrepreneur with no family connections? "Carly, be reasonable," my mother had said during the tense dinner where I had introduced Jackson. "These startup types are here today, bankrupt tomorrow. Is that the kind of instability you want?" My younger sister Amy, always competitive and envious of any attention I received, had been even more direct. "If you're going through some rebellious phase, there are less embarrassing ways to do it," she had snickered. Only Jackson's quiet dignity throughout their thinly veiled insults had prevented me from walking out. Later that night, he had held me as I cried. "Your worth isn't determined by their approval, Carly," he had whispered. "You're extraordinary, all on your own." Despite my family's opposition, we married 6 months later, in a simple but beautiful ceremony. Not a single Preston attended. My father had called the night before, his voice cold. "If you go through with this, you're choosing to turn your back on this family and everything we've built," he had warned. With tears streaming down my face but resolve in my heart, I had made my choice. "Then I guess I'll see you when you're ready to accept the man I love." The 2 years that followed were both the happiest and most difficult of my life. Happy because Jackson and I built a beautiful life together, with a love deeper than anything I had known was possible. Difficult because the complete severing of family ties left a wound that never fully healed, especially during holidays and milestone moments. Jackson's company experienced tremendous growth during this time, though I didn't fully understand the scale of his success. He was modest about business at home, preferring to focus on our relationship rather than numbers and acquisitions. Then last month, the unexpected happened. A cream-colored envelope arrived, bearing the Preston family crest. Inside was an invitation to my sister Amy's engagement party. A handwritten note from my mother was enclosed. "We've been apart too long. Family should be together for important moments." Hope bloomed in my chest like a fragile flower. Perhaps time had softened their stance. Perhaps they were finally ready to accept Jackson and me as we were. "Are you sure about this?" Jackson had asked when I showed him the invitation. His concern was evident, protective, after witnessing how deeply their rejection had hurt me. "I have to try," I replied. "They're still my family." We planned to attend together, but the morning of the party, Jackson received an emergency call about a major business deal that couldn't wait. "I'll be there as soon as I can," he promised, kissing me goodbye. "Save me a dance." I spent hours preparing, choosing a simple but elegant pale blue silk dress and the pearl earrings Jackson had given me for our first anniversary. I selected a generous gift for Amy and her fiancé, whom I had yet to meet. The butterflies in my stomach were a mix of excitement and anxiety as I drove to my childhood home alone. What I didn't realize as I pulled up to the imposing Preston mansion was that the invitation hadn't been an olive branch at all. It had been bait for a trap, carefully set, and now ready to spring. The Preston mansion looked exactly as I remembered it, the sprawling Georgian-style home illuminated with thousands of twinkling lights for the occasion. Valets whisked away guests' luxury vehicles, while servers in crisp uniforms offered champagne at the door. Taking a deep breath, I handed my modest car keys to a valet, who barely concealed his judgment, and approached the home I had once called my own. The massive oak doors opened to reveal a scene from the life I had left behind. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the marble foyer filled with the upper echelon of society. Women draped in designer gowns and family heirlooms air-kissed each other, while men in bespoke suits discussed stock portfolios and golf handicaps. The moment I stepped inside, the subtle shift in atmosphere was palpable. Conversations paused momentarily as heads turned in my direction. I caught fragments of whispered comments as I moved through the crowd. "That's her, the Preston girl who married down. I heard they live in some apartment downtown." James cut her off completely. Not a penny. Clutching my gift bag tighter, I searched the room for a familiar, friendly face, and found none. Former friends quickly averted their gaze when I tried to make eye contact. I was a cautionary tale in their world, the girl who had chosen love over status and security. "Carly, you actually came." My sister Amy's voice rang out across the room, drawing all attention to our reunion. At 25, Amy had always been the more conventionally beautiful Preston daughter, with our mother's blonde hair and our father's commanding presence. She air-kissed both my cheeks, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Love the dress. It's so modest. Very appropriate for your situation." Before I could respond, she was pulling forward a tall man with the confident posture of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. "This is Trevor Whitfield, my fiancé." Trevor barely offered his hand. "Ah," the rebellious sister. "Amy's told me all about you." His emphasis made it clear none of what he'd heard had been flattering. "Congratulations on your engagement," I said sincerely, offering the gift bag. "I'm very happy for you both." "How thoughtful," Amy replied, immediately passing the bag to a server without even looking inside. "Put this somewhere, will you?" I never saw the gift again that evening. My mother materialized at Amy's side, resplendent in an emerald gown that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Carly, you look, well, different." She assessed me from head to toe. "Marriage seems to have changed you." "It has, Mom. For the better." "Where is this husband of yours? Or did he have something more important to do than meet your family?" The challenge in her voice was unmistakable. "Jackson had an urgent business meeting. He'll be joining later," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. "Business meeting on a Saturday night? How convenient." The skepticism in her tone suggested she didn't believe Jackson existed at all. Across the room, I spotted my father in conversation with several older men I recognized as his business associates. He had seen me, but was deliberately focusing elsewhere. The message was clear. I was to be acknowledged, but not welcomed. As the evening progressed, the subtle jabs became more overt. During dinner, I was seated at the furthest table from the family, surrounded by distant acquaintances and elderly relatives who couldn't quite place who I was. The real humiliation began during the toasts. Trevor's father stood first, raising his glass to the perfect union of two exceptional families. Then my father spoke, his words particularly pointed. When a daughter makes the right choices, aligning herself with a partner who understands the value of legacy and family commitment, a father can rest easy knowing the future is secure. Amy has always understood what truly matters. To Amy and Trevor, who will strengthen the Preston name for generations to come. The implication hung heavy in the air. Unlike Amy, I had failed to understand what truly matters. After the toasts, several guests approached me, with thinly veiled curiosity. "So, this husband of yours, what exactly does he do again?" asked Mrs. Harrington, my mother's oldest friend. "He founded and runs a technology company," I answered proudly. "Oh, how interesting. One of those app things the kids use?" She didn't wait for my response before continuing. "And still no children? Amy mentioned you're focusing on. What was it again?" Before I could answer, another guest jumped in. "Probably for the best, dear. Children should have stability." I excused myself to find the restroom, needing a moment alone to compose myself. As I was touching up my makeup, the door opened, and Amy entered with our mother. They didn't notice me in the powder room section around the corner. "She actually believed we wanted to reconcile," Amy laughed, the sound brittle and cold. "As if we'd welcome her and her nobody husband back after she embarrassed the family." My mother's response froze me in place. The invitation served its purpose. James has been too soft, thinking she'd come crawling back when this marriage inevitably fails. Tonight we show her exactly what she gave up. By the time Trevor's family announces the merger with Preston Holdings, she'll understand exactly how poorly she chose. "Did you see her face when Dad toasted us?" Priceless. Amy's voice contained years of resentment. Always the perfect Carly, Dad's favorite, until she threw it all away. Well, now everyone will see which Preston daughter made the smart choice. I stepped out from my corner, startling them both. "So this was all a setup? You invited me here just to humiliate me?" Amy recovered quickly, her expression hardening. "Consider it a reality check, sister dear. A reminder of everything you're missing while playing house with your startup boyfriend." The bathroom door opened again, as several women from the party entered, forcing our confrontation to end prematurely. I pushed past them, fighting back tears that threatened to undermine the little dignity I had left. Returning to the ballroom, I found the atmosphere had shifted. Amy had taken center stage, clinking a spoon against her champagne glass to gather attention. "Since my dear sister has finally joined us after her 2-year absence, I think now would be the perfect time for a proper family photo, don't you think?" Reluctantly, I was ushered forward to stand awkwardly beside my father, who maintained a foot of distance between us. "But wait," Amy continued with exaggerated concern. "We're still missing Carly's mysterious husband, the one none of us have ever met. Has anyone seen him? Anyone at all?" The room filled with uncomfortable chuckles. "Maybe he got lost on the way to our humble home," Trevor added, drawing more laughter. "Or perhaps he's just camera shy," Amy suggested with mock sympathy. "Or entirely fictional. It's hard to tell these days." My face burned with humiliation as whispers rippled through the crowd. "That's enough, Amy," I said quietly. "Jackson is real, and he'll be here soon." "Of course he will," she replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Then, with deliberate slowness, she raised her glass of red wine. Our eyes locked for one terrible moment before she stumbled forward, sending the entire contents cascading down the front of my pale blue silk dress. Gasps and poorly concealed laughter erupted around us. "Oh my goodness," Amy exclaimed with theatrical horror. "How terribly clumsy of me. She made a show of dabbing at the spreading stain with a cocktail napkin, ensuring it worsened rather than improved. The room spun around me as I stood there, publicly humiliated, wine dripping from my ruined dress onto the marble floor. In that moment, I realized with absolute clarity that this had been their plan all along. I wasn't invited as a gesture of reconciliation. I was invited to be put in my place. The shock of Amy's deliberate action left me momentarily frozen. As red wine dripped from my once beautiful dress onto the polished marble floor, the room filled with a terrible silence before erupting into poorly disguised titters and whispers. "Someone get her a towel," my mother called out, her voice carrying the perfect note of concern while her eyes remained cold and satisfied. A server approached with a white cloth, but Amy intercepted him. "I'll help my sister," she said, her voice syrupy with fake solicitude. She grabbed my arm with unnecessary force, pulling me toward a side room off the main hall. "Let's get you cleaned up, shall we?" Once the door closed behind us, her facade dropped completely. "You always had to be the center of attention, didn't you?" she hissed, throwing the towel at me. "The perfect daughter, the family favorite, the one with all the potential. Do you have any idea what it was like growing up in your shadow?" I dabbed uselessly at my ruined dress. "Is that what this is about? Some childhood rivalry?" "Amy, we're adults now. This is about consequences," she snapped. "You chose to betray this family, to throw away everything we stand for, and you still expected to be welcomed back with open arms?" "I fell in love," I said simply. "That's hardly betrayal. You fell in love with someone beneath you, someone who could offer you nothing compared to what you already had." I shook my head, suddenly seeing my sister with painful clarity. "Jackson offered me something no one in this family ever has. Acceptance for who I am, not what name I carry." The door opened, and my mother swept in, closing it firmly behind her. Her expression was no longer maintaining even the pretense of warmth. "I see Amy has explained the situation," she said coldly. "Did you really think one invitation meant all was forgiven? That you could waltz back in here with your head held high after what you did to this family? What exactly did I do to this family, Mom? Love someone you didn't choose for me? Live my life on my own terms?" My mother's laugh was brittle. "You threw away generations of careful planning and connections. The Preston name opens doors that remain firmly closed to ordinary people like your husband. Jackson doesn't need doors opened for him. He creates his own opportunities. Yes, your mythical successful husband." Amy rolled her eyes dramatically. "If he's so accomplished, where is he? Where's his company?" "I've never even heard of Warner Tech in any business circles." Before I could respond, the door opened again, and my father entered, followed closely by Trevor. My father's expression was thunderous, his disappointment radiating off him in waves. "Causing a scene at your sister's engagement party," he said, shaking his head. "Some things never change." "I didn't cause any scene," I protested. "Amy deliberately poured wine on me." "Always the victim," Trevor commented smoothly. "Amy warned me about your talent for drama." My father held up his hand for silence. "Trevor's family is announcing the merger between Whitfield Industries and Preston Holdings tonight. This union goes far beyond marriage. It secures the future of both families for generations to come." His gaze hardened as he looked at me. "While you've been playing house with your entrepreneur, Amy has been securing her future, and ours, with a man who understands family obligation. Is that all marriage is to you? A business transaction?" I asked, my voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. "Marriage is about building something larger than yourself," my father replied. "Something Amy clearly understands, and you never did. So that's it? You invited me here just to show me how wrong my choices were? To parade Amy's success in front of me?" "We invited you to witness what true family loyalty looks like," my mother said coldly. "Though I'm beginning to think even that lesson is beyond your comprehension." Amy stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "And to be honest, we all placed bets on whether your mystery husband would actually show up. I said he wouldn't, because he probably doesn't exist. Just a convenient fiction to save face, after you realized your mistake. something inside me snapped. 2 years of hurt, of missing my family despite their cruelty, of hoping for a reconciliation that clearly was never going to happen. It all crystallized into a white-hot anger that burned away my remaining restraint. Jackson is more real, more genuine, and more successful than anyone in this room, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. He loves me for exactly who I am, not what I can do for the family name or bank account. And when he arrives, enough! My father's voice boomed through the room. I've heard enough of your fantasies. You made your choice 2 years ago, Carly. You chose a stranger over your flesh and blood. A stranger who showed me more respect in our first conversation than I've received in this house my entire life, I retorted. Trevor chuckled. I think what we're witnessing is someone who's realized her mistake, but is too proud to admit it. Let me guess. You came hoping to reconcile because you need money? The startup bubble finally burst? How dare you? I breathed. Amy smirked triumphantly. He's right, isn't he? That's why you accepted the invitation so quickly. You're broke and came crawling back. The accusation was so far from the truth, it was almost laughable. But the hurt it caused was real. These people, my own family, thought so little of me that they assumed I would only reach out for financial gain. I came because I foolishly believed that despite everything, blood still meant something, I said quietly. I see now how wrong I was. My father's expression hardened further. The Preston blood runs true in Amy. Whatever flows through your veins now is something else entirely. The door opened again, and one of the servers peered in. Excuse me, Mr. Preston, but the Whitfields are ready for the merger announcement. The accusation was so far from the truth, it was almost laughable, but the hurt it caused was real. These people, my own family, thought so little of me that they assumed I would only reach out for financial gain. They moved toward the door, but Amy paused, turning back with a cruel smile. Actually, I have a better idea. My father nodded curtly. We'll be right there. He turned back to me. Stay in here until you've composed yourself. I won't have you disrupting this important moment. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate our engagement. Before we make our special announcement, I feel I must address a situation. Her gaze fixed on me, standing awkwardly near the back with my wine-stained dress. My sister Carly has joined us tonight, allegedly with her husband. However, it seems this mystery man is nowhere to be found. She strode back into the ballroom with purpose, the rest of us following in confusion. Ascending the 3 steps to the small stage where the string quartet had been playing, Amy took the microphone. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Blood rushed to my face as every eye in the room turned to me. Amy, please don't do this, I pleaded quietly. But she was relentless. In fact, I think we all deserve honesty. Are you here tonight hoping to benefit from the Preston name again after abandoning it? Perhaps seeking financial assistance now that your rash decision has left you struggling? The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and I saw looks of both pity and disdain directed my way. My husband is real, I said, my voice somehow steady despite the hurricane of emotions inside me, and we are doing very well, thank you. Then where is he? Trevor challenged from beside Amy. Imaginary business meetings only last so long. I opened my mouth to respond, but Amy cut me off, her voice ringing through the microphone. This is a private event for people who understand what family truly means, she declared, her eyes glittering with malice. And you, Carly, clearly do not belong here anymore. With deliberate slowness, she picked up another full glass of red wine from a nearby tray and walked toward me. This is a private event, leave now, she shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear without the microphone, and threw the contents of the glass directly at my face. Wine splashed across my face and hair, dripping down onto what remained of my already ruined dress. The gasps from the crowd were audible, followed by uncomfortable laughter from those eager to stay in the Preston family's good graces. Security, my mother called calmly, as if requesting more champagne. Please escort my daughter out. She's causing a disturbance. This is a private event, leave now, she shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear without the microphone, and threw the contents of the glass directly at my face. "Dad," I pleaded, looking to my father who stood watching the scene unfold. "Dad, please." For one brief moment, I thought I saw conflict in his eyes. Then, deliberately, he turned his back on me and walked toward the stage to join Amy and the Whitfields. The security guards led me through the stunned crowd and out the front door, where they released me with apologetic expressions. "Sorry, miss," one murmured. "Just following orders." The heavy oak door closed behind me with a decisive thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of the lock engaging. And then I was alone, standing in the pouring rain, completely soaked within seconds, wine running in pink rivulets down my ruined dress, the sounds of the party continuing uninterrupted behind the thick walls of the mansion that had once been my home. The rain fell in merciless sheets, plastering my hair to my face and neck. I stood frozen in shock, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The family I had longed to reconcile with had orchestrated my public humiliation and thrown me out into a storm. The weight of that betrayal crushed something inside me that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. I fumbled in my small evening purse for my phone, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely grasp it. When I finally pulled it out, the screen remained black, dead from the rain that had already soaked through everything I was wearing. I had no way to call Jackson, no way to get home except to walk down the long, winding driveway in the dark and hope to find a main road where I might flag down a passing car. Lightning flashed, illuminating the perfectly manicured grounds of the estate. Through the grand bay windows, I could see the party continuing, as if nothing had happened. Crystal glasses clinked, guests laughed, and there, near the center of it all, stood my father with his arm proudly around Amy's shoulders, presenting a united family front to the world. A family that no longer included me. I wrapped my arms around myself and began walking slowly down the driveway, my heels sinking into the soft, saturated ground with every step. After the third time I nearly twisted my ankle, I stopped to take them off, continuing barefoot across the wet gravel. The sharp stones bit into my soles, but the physical pain was almost a welcome distraction from the emotional agony tearing through my chest. Rain mixed with my tears until I couldn't distinguish between them anymore. My mind raced through every memory I had of growing up in that house. The Christmas mornings opening presents by the 12-foot tree in the main hall. My 16th birthday party where Dad had surprised me with my first car. Sunday dinners, where we'd discussed politics and art and literature. Had it all been conditional? Was family love something that could be revoked the moment you stepped off the prescribed path? "You chose this," I whispered to myself, the words immediately swept away by the wind. But had I really chosen to be treated this way? To be humiliated and cast out? Was loving someone my family didn't approve of truly deserving of such cruelty? I was halfway down the driveway when my legs simply gave out. I sank to my knees on the soaking gravel, no longer caring about the dress or the cuts on my feet, or the rain plastering my hair to my skull. For the first time since the wine had been poured down my dress, I allowed myself to truly break down. The sobs tore from my throat with such force it felt like they were ripping something loose inside me. Years of trying to be the perfect daughter, followed by years of missing the family that had rejected me, all of it culminating in this moment of complete abandonment. I had been a fool to think they would ever accept me on my own terms, to believe that blood would eventually overcome their disappointment in my choices. "I'm sorry, Jackson," I whispered into the storm. "You were right." He had been concerned about my coming here tonight, worried that my hopes were too high. But he had supported me anyway, understanding my need to try. And how had I repaid that understanding? By walking straight into a trap, by allowing myself to be utterly humiliated while defending our marriage to people who would never accept it. Lightning flashed again, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The storm was directly overhead now, and I was sitting in the middle of an exposed driveway, the perfect target. Some distant part of my mind suggested I should move, find shelter, protect myself, but a larger, wounded part simply didn't care anymore. Let the lightning strike. Let the storm take me. In that moment of complete desolation, It seemed almost preferable to picking up the pieces of my shattered dignity and moving forward. I don't know how long I stayed there, kneeling in the rain. Time seemed to lose all meaning, minutes stretching into what felt like hours. Eventually, I became aware of a new sound cutting through the storm, an engine approaching from the bottom of the drive. Distant headlights pierced the darkness, growing stronger as the vehicle made its way up the winding path toward the mansion. Probably late guests, I thought dully, or perhaps some of the older attendees leaving early. They would pass right by me, this pathetic figure crouched in the rain. I should move, I knew. I should at least get to my feet, try to salvage what little dignity remained. But my body refused to respond, as if the weight of rejection had physically pinned me to the ground. The headlights grew brighter, illuminating the curtain of rain in brilliant white. The vehicle was moving slowly, carefully navigating the treacherous conditions. As it drew closer, I could make out the sleek silhouette of a luxury car, far more expensive than anything I had expected. The car slowed even further as it approached my huddled form, then came to a complete stop about 20 feet away. The headlights were blinding, forcing me to raise a hand to shield my eyes. For one wild moment, I wondered if this was some final act in my family's elaborate humiliation. Perhaps they had called the police to remove me from the property entirely. The driver's door opened, and a tall figure emerged, momentarily silhouetted against the headlights. My heart lurched painfully in my chest as I recognized the familiar outline. Carly? Jackson's voice carried through the rain, equal parts confusion and alarm. Jackson? I called back, my voice breaking. He was running now, splashing through puddles without a thought for his expensive suit or leather shoes. Then he was beside me, kneeling in the gravel, his warm hands on my freezing cheeks. My God, Carly, what happened? Are you hurt? The concern in his voice unleashed a fresh wave of tears. They invited me just to humiliate me, I managed between sobs. They never wanted to reconcile. It was all a setup. Understanding and fury battled for dominance in his expression. Without another word, he shrugged out of his suit jacket and wrapped it around my shoulders, then helped me to my feet. You're freezing, he said, his arm tight around my waist as he supported me. Let's get you in the car. Only then did I notice that Jackson's car wasn't alone on the driveway. Behind it, 2 more luxury vehicles had pulled up, their headlights cutting through the rain. As Jackson guided me toward his car, the doors of the other vehicles opened, and several figures emerged, all holding umbrellas against the downpour. Jackson, I whispered, confused. Who are all these people? Colleagues, he replied simply, opening the passenger door and helping me inside. The rush of warm air from the car's heater was almost painful against my chilled skin. Jackson closed my door and walked around to the driver's side, signaling something to the others before sliding in beside me. Up close, I could see that his suit, while now soaked from the rain, was more formal than his usual business attire. I'm so sorry, I began, the words tumbling out in a rush. You were right about them. I should have listened. Shh, he interrupted gently, taking my ice-cold hands in his warm ones. Don't apologize, you did nothing wrong. His eyes darkened as he took in my wine-stained dress and tear-streaked face. Tell me exactly what happened. Through chattering teeth, I recounted the evening's events, the cold reception, the backhanded comments, overhearing my mother and Amy's conversation, and finally the public humiliation and ejection from the party. Jackson's expression grew increasingly stormy as I spoke, though his hands remained gentle around mine. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he controlled his anger. These people who just arrived with you, I said hesitantly. Why are they here? I thought you had a business meeting. A small, enigmatic smile touched his lips. I did. The meeting ran long because we were finalizing a rather significant acquisition. He glanced at his watch. Perfect timing, actually. Acquisition? Jackson, what's going on? Instead of answering directly, he reached into the back seat and pulled out a small duffel bag. I brought a change of clothes for you, just in case the party ran late and we decided to stay in the city tonight. He unzipped the bag, revealing a simple but elegant black dress, a pair of flats, and a small makeup bag. It's not much, but it's dry. The thoughtfulness of the gesture, that he had packed a bag for me just in case, brought fresh tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. "Take your time," he said, starting the car to keep the heater running. "I need to speak with my associates briefly." As he stepped out into the rain to converse with the mysterious colleagues who had accompanied him, I peeled off my ruined silk dress and used the small towel he had included to dry myself as best I could. The black dress fit perfectly, and I managed to wipe away the worst of my smeared makeup. I couldn't do much about my hair, still damp and tangled from the rain, but at least I no longer looked like a complete disaster. Through the car windows, I could see Jackson speaking intensely, with a group of 4 people huddled under umbrellas. One was a woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed despite the weather. Beside her stood a distinguished older gentleman, I vaguely recognized but couldn't place. The other 2 were younger men in expensive suits, one of whom was gesturing animatedly as he spoke. Jackson nodded at something the older man said, then glanced back toward the mansion with an expression I had rarely seen on his face: cold, calculated determination. He said something else to the group, and they all nodded in agreement. When Jackson returned to the car, his expression softened immediately upon seeing me. "Better?" I nodded, though better was relative. Physically, I was no longer soaking wet and freezing. Emotionally, I was still raw and bleeding. "Jackson, who are those people? What's going on?" He took my hand again, his thumb gently stroking my palm. "Remember that business emergency that kept me from accompanying you earlier? It was the final negotiation for acquiring Tempest Technologies." I gasped softly. Tempest was one of the largest competitors to my family's company, Preston Holdings. They specialized in the same market sectors, but had consistently outperformed Preston in innovation over the past decade. "The woman out there is Senator Gloria Harkins," he continued. "The older gentleman is Richard Caulfield." "The director?" I asked, recognizing the name of the award-winning filmmaker. Jackson nodded. "The others are Evan Miller, who runs the largest tech investment firm on the West Coast, and Daniel Park, whose banking group financed the acquisition." My mind was spinning, trying to connect the dots. But why are they all here? Now? They came for dinner to celebrate closing the deal. When I told them I needed to meet my wife at her family's home first, they insisted on joining. They were curious about the famous Preston family. His eyes held mine, particularly since they've just learned that Tempest will now be positioned to acquire Preston Holdings. The implications of what he was saying slowly dawned on me. "Jackson, what exactly did you buy?" "I bought the company that's about to buy your family's company," he said simply. "And that's not all." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. "This arrived yesterday, but I was waiting for the right moment. I guess that moment is now." I took the envelope with trembling fingers and opened it. Inside was a property deed. As I scanned the document, my breath caught. This is the deed to the mansion. "And the surrounding property?" Jackson nodded. "A holding company purchased it last month when it was quietly put on the market. That holding company is a subsidiary of Warner Tech." He paused. "My company." I stared at him in disbelief. "My family home was for sale? They never said anything." "Your father has been over-leveraged for years, Carly. Preston Holdings has been losing market share steadily. The mansion was collateral for loans that were called in." His expression was gentle but firm. "They didn't tell you because they're ashamed. The merger with Whitfield Industries was supposed to save them. But now you own Tempest, which is positioned to acquire Preston Holdings," I said slowly. "And you also own the actual mansion they're partying in right now." "Correct." Jackson's eyes held mine. "The question is, what do you want to do with that information?" I stared at the property deed in my hands, the elegant legal language blurring as I tried to process what Jackson was telling me. My family home, the mansion I had grown up in, the symbol of Preston legacy and pride, now legally belonged to my husband, the husband they had just mocked and dismissed as fictional or failing. "They don't know, do they?" I asked quietly. About any of this? I stared at the property deed in my hands, the elegant legal language blurring as I tried to process what Jackson was telling me. My family home, the mansion I had grown up in, the symbol of Preston legacy and pride, now legally belonged to my husband, the husband they had just mocked and dismissed as fictional or failing. Jackson shook his head. The acquisition of Tempest was kept confidential until the papers were signed this evening. As for the mansion, your father arranged the sale through 3 different shell companies to hide his financial difficulties. The buyer was similarly discreet, his lips curved in a slight smile. He has no idea he sold his home to his son-in-law. A strange calm settled over me as I considered the situation. Just minutes ago, I had been kneeling in the rain, utterly broken by my family's cruelty. Now, I held in my hands the power to deliver a reckoning they never saw coming. Or we can go inside, I finished for him. Our eyes met in perfect understanding. This wasn't about revenge. This was about truth, about standing up for ourselves and our marriage. Those people out there, I nodded toward Jackson's associates, still waiting patiently in the rain. They're going to witness whatever happens next. They already know the broad strokes of our situation, Jackson admitted. I had to explain why I was so determined to finalize everything today, why I needed to get to you as quickly as possible. I took a deep breath, smoothing down the black dress he had brought me. Then let's not keep them waiting in the rain any longer. Jackson smiled, a genuine smile full of pride. Are you sure? I've never been more certain of anything, I replied, finding strength I didn't know I still possessed. We stepped out of the car together, Jackson immediately putting his arm around my waist in a gesture, both protective and supportive. The group approached, and Jackson made quick introductions. My wife, Carly Warner, he said, the pride in his voice unmistakable. Carly, you already know about Senator Harkins, Richard Caulfield, Evan Miller, and Daniel Park. I shook each of their hands, acutely aware of my still damp hair and the absence of the pearls I'd so carefully selected earlier. Mrs. Warner, Senator Harkins said warmly, Jackson has told us so much about you. I'm sorry we're meeting under such unconventional circumstances. Please, call me Carly, I replied, and thank you all for coming. I apologize for the drama. No apology necessary, Richard Caulfield assured me, his distinguished voice carrying the gravitas of someone who had seen it all in his long career. Family complications make for the best stories, though they're rarely pleasant to live through. I glanced toward the mansion, where the party continued, oblivious to the scene unfolding in the driveway. Would you all mind waiting just a moment? I need to speak privately with my husband. They graciously stepped back toward their vehicles, and I turned to Jackson, lowering my voice. Before we do this, I need to know something, I said, searching his eyes. Did you arrange all of this? Buying Tempest, acquiring the mansion, because of how my family treated me? Jackson considered the question carefully before answering. The Tempest acquisition has been in the works for months. It makes perfect business sense regardless of personal connections. He paused. But did I accelerate the timeline when I realized what it could mean for Preston Holdings? Yes. And the mansion? That was more opportunistic, he admitted. When my real estate division flagged that the property had been quietly listed through a series of shell companies, I did some digging. Once I confirmed it was your family home being sold off to cover debt, I moved quickly. His expression grew serious. Not for revenge, Carly, for leverage if we ever needed it. And to preserve something that I know means a great deal to you despite everything. The honesty of his answer touched me deeply. This wasn't about destroying my family. It was about protecting us and creating options for the future. Thank you for telling me the truth, I said, squeezing his hand. Let's go inside. Jackson signaled to the butler, who had been watching our gathering with increasing confusion from the relative shelter of the mansion's portico. The man approached cautiously, clearly uncertain about this group of late arrivals. Good evening, he began stiffly. I'm afraid the event is by invitation only. Jackson reached into his jacket and produced his business card, handing it over with the property deed. My name is Jackson Warner. I believe you'll find everything in order. The butler scanned the documents, his professional composure slipping as he processed what he was reading. "Sir, I don't understand. This appears to be the deed to this property," Jackson confirmed. "Recently transferred to my company. And these are my guests." He gestured to the distinguished group behind us. "Senator Harkins, Mr. Caulfield, Mr. Nason, Miller, and Mr. Park. We're here to join the celebration." The butler's eyes widened further as he recognized the names, particularly the senators. "Yes, of course. Please, come in out of the rain." As he turned to lead us inside, Jackson handed him one more document, a sealed envelope. "Please deliver this to James Preston immediately." "What is that?" I whispered, as we followed the butler toward the entrance. "Formal notice of Tempest's intent to acquire Preston Holdings," Jackson replied quietly, along with an invitation to discuss terms. The opulent foyer fell silent as we entered, a stark contrast to the noisy rejection I had faced less than an hour before. Guests turned to stare at our unusual party, whispers quickly spreading through the room. I recognized the exact moment people identified Senator Harkins and Richard Caulfield, the confusion and surprise rippling across faces. In the center of the grand hall, my family stood with the Whitfields, glasses raised in what appeared to be another toast. My father was speaking, his voice carrying across the room until he noticed the commotion at the entrance. His words faltered as he saw me, now dry and composed, standing arm in arm with Jackson, and accompanied by some of the most influential people in the country. The butler approached my father discreetly, handing him Jackson's envelope with a few whispered words. I watched as my father's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief as he opened and scanned the contents. His face drained of color, eyes darting between the document and Jackson. "Jackson," I murmured, suddenly uncertain. "Maybe we should." "Trust me," he whispered back. "Follow my lead." My father handed the document to Trevor's father, whose reaction was equally telling: shock, followed by what appeared to be calculating assessment. The two men exchanged urgent whispers before my father handed his champagne glass to a nearby server and started toward us, Trevor and his father close behind. "Mr. Warner," my father said stiffly when he reached us, extending his hand to Jackson. "I wasn't aware you would be joining us this evening. I promised my wife I wouldn't miss her sister's engagement party," Jackson replied pleasantly, accepting the handshake. "James Preston, I presume? Carly has told me so much about you." My father's jaw tightened at the deliberate informality, but with Senator Harkins observing the exchange, he could hardly object. "And these are your colleagues?" he asked, eyeing the distinguished group. "Allow me to introduce Senator Gloria Harkins," Jackson began, making the formal introductions. With each impressive name, my father and Trevor seemed to grow increasingly uncomfortable. "We were just celebrating the completion of a major acquisition," Jackson continued smoothly. "Tempest Technologies is now a subsidiary of Warner Tech. I believe you're familiar with the company?" Trevor's father stepped forward, unable to contain himself. "You're the one who acquired Tempest? We've been trying to partner with them for years." "Yes. I understand they were considering several options," Jackson replied. "Fortunately, our vision for the future aligned most closely with theirs." My father's eyes narrowed slightly. "And the other document you sent over? Some proposition regarding Preston Holdings?" "A conversation for another time, perhaps," Jackson suggested. "Tonight is for celebration, after all." My mother and Amy had now joined our growing circle, Amy's face a mask of confusion as she took in the scene. "Carly," my mother said, her voice falsely bright, "I see you've changed." "Yes, Mother." My husband thoughtfully brought me a dry outfit after I was thrown out into the storm. I held her gaze steadily, refusing to play along with any pretense. "There must have been some misunderstanding," she tried, her eyes darting nervously to Senator Harkins. "Oh, I think everything was perfectly clear," I replied. "As Amy said, this was supposed to be a private event for family. I'm simply respecting her wishes by returning with my actual family." Amy's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. You can't just barge back in here with some random people. Actually, the butler interjected with perfect timing. Mr. Warner is now the legal owner of this property, Miss Preston. He and his guests have every right to be here. The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye in the vicinity turned to Jackson, then to my father, whose expression confirmed the butler's shocking announcement. "That's impossible," Amy whispered, but the certainty had drained from her voice. Jackson merely smiled. "The deed transfer was completed last month. I believe congratulations are in order, both for your engagement and for the Whitfield-Preston merger announcement. Although," he paused, glancing at the envelope my father still clutched, "that particular business arrangement might need some reconsideration in light of Tempest's position." Trevor and his father exchanged alarmed looks. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion privately," my father suggested, his voice tight with controlled panic. "I don't think that's necessary," Jackson replied. "After all, you were quite comfortable discussing my wife's personal choices publicly earlier this evening." Director Caulfield cleared his throat. "Jackson, if I might interrupt, that screenplay we discussed, about the self-made entrepreneur who outmaneuvers the established old-money families? I'm seeing it play out rather dramatically right now." "Life does occasionally provide the best source material, Richard," Jackson agreed with a smile. Senator Harkins took a step forward. "James Preston, we met at the governor's fundraiser last year, I believe. You spoke quite passionately about family values." Her gaze shifted meaningfully to me, standing there in my hastily changed dress, obviously recently ejected from the party. Fascinating to see those values in practice. My father's carefully constructed public persona was crumbling before my eyes. The powerful man who had turned his back on me less than an hour ago now looked diminished, caught between his financial desperation and the social catastrophe unfolding in front of his most important contacts. "There's been a misunderstanding," he attempted again. "Family disagreements can sometimes—" "Spare us the performance, Dad," I interrupted quietly. "Everyone here knows exactly what happened." To my surprise, it was Daniel Park who spoke next, addressing me directly. "Mrs. Warner, your husband mentioned you run a foundation for first-generation college students?" I nodded, somewhat taken aback by the change in subject. "Yes, we established it last year. We provide scholarships and mentoring for students who are the first in their families to pursue higher education." "Remarkable," he commented. "And entirely funded through your personal resources, I understand." "Jackson and I believe in creating opportunities," I explained, aware that my family was hearing about this for the first time. "Many of these students have had to choose between family expectations and their own dreams. We try to make that choice less painful." Senator Harkins nodded approvingly. "I'd love to hear more about this foundation. Perhaps at our dinner?" "I believe we still have a reservation waiting." My father cleared his throat. "Surely you'll stay for the engagement celebration? As a family?" The desperation in his voice was palpable. With Senator Harkins and these influential business leaders present, the social and financial stakes had shifted dramatically. Now he wanted us to stay, not out of love or regret, but to save face and potentially his company. I looked at Jackson, silently asking what he wanted to do. He squeezed my hand gently, leaving the decision entirely to me. In that moment, looking at the family who had rejected me, humiliated me, and thrown me out into a storm, I found clarity. I was no longer the desperate daughter seeking approval. I was Carly Warner, standing on my own strength, married to a man who supported me unconditionally, surrounded by people who respected us both. "I'm afraid we have prior commitments," I said calmly. "But Jackson will be in touch regarding Preston Holdings. And of course, as the property owner, he'll need to discuss the future of the mansion." Amy's face had gone deathly pale. "What do you mean, the future of the mansion?" Jackson smiled politely. "Real estate decisions are complex. I'll have my team reach out with details." As we turned to leave, my father took a step toward me. "Carly, wait." I paused, facing him one last time. "Your mother and I? Perhaps we've been hasty in our judgments," he managed, the words clearly costing him. It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get, and we both knew it was motivated more by self-preservation than genuine remorse. Still, something inside me softened slightly at the hint of vulnerability in his eyes. Hasty? It's been 2 years, Dad. I shook my head. Enjoy the rest of the party. We can talk tomorrow, when you're ready to have an honest conversation. As we walked away, Jackson discreetly passed a card to the butler. My private number, I heard him say quietly, for when the family is ready to discuss arrangements. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, the night air fresh and clean after the storm. As we approached the waiting cars, I felt an enormous weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I was free from seeking my family's approval or fearing their judgment. Jackson opened the car door for me, then paused. Dinner? Or would you prefer to go home? I looked back at the mansion that had once defined me, then at the extraordinary man who had shown me I was so much more than a family name. Dinner, I decided firmly. I think we have quite a lot to celebrate. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the windows of our penthouse apartment, casting warm patterns across the bed. I lay awake, watching Jackson sleep beside me, marveling at the events of the previous night. After leaving the mansion, we had enjoyed an incredible dinner with Senator Harkins and the others, who had been surprisingly warm and supportive, despite witnessing such a personal family drama. You married well, Senator Harkins had told me privately when Jackson stepped away from the table, not because of his success, but because of his character. That's rare in my circles. Now, as I studied my husband's peaceful face, I felt a surge of gratitude. He hadn't just rescued me from the rain. He had given me back my dignity, my strength, and my voice. The gentle chime of Jackson's phone broke the morning stillness. He stirred, reaching for it, with eyes still closed. "Warner," he mumbled, then sat up suddenly, fully alert. "Yes, James. Good morning to you too." My father. I felt a knot form in my stomach as Jackson listened, occasionally making affirmative noises. Finally, he said, 2 hours, our place. Yes, she'll be here. He ended the call and turned to me. Your family would like to meet with us. All of them. Your parents, Amy, and Trevor. I sat up, pulling the sheets around me. What did he say exactly? That they want to discuss recent developments and clear up misunderstandings, Jackson replied, his tone neutral. I told them to come here. I thought you might feel more comfortable on home ground. Our apartment, while luxurious, was nothing like the Preston mansion. We had chosen it for the spectacular views of the city and the warm, inviting space that reflected both our tastes. Jackson's modern sensibilities softened by my preference for comfortable elegance. Are you okay with this? Jackson asked, studying my face carefully. I considered the question. Yesterday, I had been desperate for reconciliation. Today, after experiencing the depths of their cruelty, I felt different, stronger, more clear-eyed. Yes, I decided. Let's hear what they have to say. 2 hours later, the doorbell rang. Our housekeeper, Maria, showed my family into the living room, where Jackson and I waited. The contrast between their stiff formality and the relaxed atmosphere of our home was immediately apparent. My father entered first, followed by my mother, then Amy and Trevor. Their expressions ranged from my father's carefully controlled neutrality to Amy's poorly disguised hostility. Please, sit down, I said, gesturing to the arranged seating area. Jackson stood slightly behind me, his hand resting supportively on my shoulder. An uncomfortable silence fell as they took their seats, eyes darting around our home, clearly assessing and comparing it to their own expectations. Thank you for agreeing to meet, my father finally began, his business voice firmly in place. Last night's events raised several matters that require immediate attention. We're listening, Jackson replied simply. My father cleared his throat. First, regarding the mansion. There must be some mistake in the property records. That house has been in the Preston family for 3 generations. There's no mistake. Jackson said calmly. The property was listed for sale through Meridian Holdings, which traces back to Westlake Financial Group, which is ultimately controlled by Preston Investments. He produced a folder containing copies of all relevant documentation. The sale was completed legally and binding. My father's jaw tightened as he accepted the folder, but didn't open it. Why would you purchase our family home in secret? Why would you sell it in secret? I countered. And more importantly, why wasn't I, a Preston by birth, informed that our family home was being sold off? Business decisions don't require family consultations, my father replied stiffly. Exactly the philosophy that's led us here, I observed. Treating family as business and business as family never ends well, does it? My mother spoke up, her voice taking on the conciliatory tone she used when trying to smooth over my father's bluntness. What Carly means to say is that we're interested in discussing arrangements that might be beneficial for everyone. What my mother means, I clarified, is that they want to know if they can stay in the house and if Jackson is actually going to proceed with acquiring Preston Holdings through Tempest. Trevor shifted uncomfortably. The merger between Whitfield Industries and Preston Holdings is already in progress. Contracts have been drafted, but not signed, Jackson noted. And the terms would need significant revision now that Tempest is positioned to make a competitive offer. You can't possibly intend to use your relationship with our daughter to take over our company, my father said, an edge of desperation entering his voice. Jackson's expression remained calm. I don't mix personal relationships with business strategy, James. Tempest's interest in Preston Holdings is purely based on market analysis and growth potential. The fact that I'm married to your daughter is incidental. Incidental? Amy finally spoke, her voice sharp. Nothing about this is incidental. You've orchestrated this whole situation for revenge because we didn't welcome you into the family. I laughed, the sound genuinely amused rather than bitter. Amy, do you really think Jackson built a multi-billion-dollar company just to get back at the Prestons for snubbing him? His world doesn't revolve around our family drama. Then, what do you want? She demanded, looking between us. Why are you doing this? For the first time since they arrived, I truly looked at my sister, really looked at her. Behind the anger and defensiveness, I could see fear. Her perfect world, where she was the favored daughter set to marry into another wealthy family and secure her future, was suddenly under threat. I don't want anything from you, Amy, I said softly. That's what you've never understood. I didn't marry Jackson for status or money or to prove anything to anyone. I married him because I love him, and he loves me exactly as I am. Very touching, my father interrupted. But it doesn't address the practical matters at hand. Are you planning to evict us from our home? Is Warner Tech going to dismantle the company I've spent my life building? Jackson stepped forward. No one is being evicted immediately. As for Preston Holdings, Tempest will make a fair market offer based on current valuation. What happens next is business, not personal. Not personal? My mother's voice rose slightly. You're discussing our home, our livelihood. The same home you threw your daughter out of? Jackson countered, a rare edge entering his tone. The same livelihood you used as leverage to control her choices? A tense silence followed his words. We made mistakes, my father admitted reluctantly, in our handling of Carly's situation. Marriage, I corrected. My marriage, Dad. Not a situation. He nodded stiffly. Your marriage. Perhaps we were overly concerned about its implications for the family. Concerned enough to deliberately humiliate me at Amy's engagement party? I asked quietly. My mother at least had the grace to look ashamed. Things got out of hand. Amy was upset, and I poured wine on you, Amy interrupted suddenly, her voice smaller than I had heard it in years. Twice. And I told security to throw you out in the rain. She looked down at her hands. I can't take that back. Concerned enough to deliberately humiliate me at Amy's engagement party? I asked quietly. No, you can't take it back, I agreed. But you can explain why. Really why, Amy. Not because I married someone you didn't approve of, but the real reason. She looked up, her composure cracking slightly. Because you had everything. Dad's approval. Mom's attention. The perfect Preston daughter who could do no wrong. And then, you threw it all away. For love. She nearly spat the word. And the worst part? You were happy. You walked away from everything I've spent my life trying to earn, and you were happier without it. The raw honesty of her admission hung in the air between us. I was never in competition with you, Amy, I said gently. We were both trying to earn the same impossible approval, just in different ways. Trevor cleared his throat awkwardly. Perhaps we should return to the business matters. The merger. The merger was your idea, wasn't it? Jackson asked suddenly, turning his attention to Trevor. A way to rescue Preston Holdings from its financial troubles while gaining control of its remaining assets and client relationships? Trevor's surprised expression confirmed Jackson's assessment. You knew the company was struggling, Jackson continued. You saw an opportunity to acquire a respected name and existing contracts at a discount through marriage, rather than a proper business transaction. That's absurd, Trevor protested, but his eyes shifted away. Is it? Jackson turned to my father. Did you review the proposed merger terms carefully, James? Did you notice the clause that would give Whitfield controlling interest in all decision-making? Or the provision for restructuring that would allow them to replace Preston leadership within 12 months? My father's expression darkened. What are you talking about? Jackson pulled another document from his briefcase, a copy of the merger agreement, page 17, section 4, and page 23, addendum C. As my father flipped to the indicated sections, his face grew increasingly thunderous. These weren't in the draft I reviewed. They were added in the final revisions, Jackson explained, buried in technical language most people wouldn't scrutinize. Trevor shifted uncomfortably as my father turned to him with barely contained fury. Is this true? My father demanded. Was this merger designed to push me out of my own company? Business is business, Trevor replied coldly, dropping the pretense. Preston Holdings has been mismanaged for years. The Whitfield approach would have salvaged what value remains. Amy stared at her fiancé in shock. You never mentioned any of this to me. It wasn't relevant to our relationship, Trevor replied dismissively. Wasn't relevant? Amy repeated incredulously. You were planning to push my father out of his company while marrying me, and that wasn't relevant? I watched my sister's world shifting before her eyes, much as mine had when I realized the family invitation had been a setup for humiliation. The Preston name still has value, Trevor said, his tone making it clear exactly what he thought of that value. The merger made financial sense. And our engagement? Amy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Did that make financial sense too? Trevor's silence was answer enough. My mother reached for Amy's hand, but she pulled away sharply. Don't. Just. Don't. For the first time, I felt genuine empathy for my sister. For all her faults, she didn't deserve to discover her engagement had been little more than a business transaction. Jackson cleared his throat. Let me propose an alternative approach. Tempest's offer for Preston Holdings will be fair and transparent. No hidden clauses, no forced leadership changes. Your company needs capital and updated technology to remain competitive. We can provide both without stripping the Preston name or legacy. My father looked up from the merger documents, his expression guarded but attentive. And the mansion? A separate matter, Jackson replied. Legally, it belongs to Warner Properties now, but I have no intention of forcing anyone out immediately. What are your terms? My father asked directly. Jackson glanced at me, and I nodded slightly, giving him permission to continue. We established the Preston Foundation, Jackson began, a charitable organization dedicated to supporting families torn apart by expectations and control. The foundation will be housed in the mansion, with a portion remaining as the family residence. Carly will chair the board, with family members welcome to participate if they choose. The proposal hung in the air, unexpected and transformative. Not a punishment, but a path forward. You want to turn our home into a charity? My mother asked, sounding both confused and slightly offended. I want to turn a symbol of Preston control and status into something that actually helps people, I clarified, while preserving it for future generations, just not as a private residence that can be leveraged or sold when finances get tight. My father studied me with new eyes, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. You've thought this through. Jackson and I discussed possibilities last night, I acknowledged. After you threw me out into the rain, I had a lot of time to think about what really matters. Amy suddenly stood up, moving away from Trevor to stand by the window. I'm sorry, she said quietly, her back to us. For all of it. Not just last night. For years of resentment and competition. She turned, her eyes meeting mine. You were right to choose your own path. I was just too afraid to choose mine. The unexpected apology created a delicate moment of possibility between us. Not forgiveness, not yet, but an opening where there had only been walls before. As for the business offer, my father said, returning to more comfortable territory, I'd need to see the details, review the numbers. Of course, Jackson agreed. My team can prepare a complete proposal by the end of the week. And what about Trevor and Whitfield Industries? My father asked, a hint of the shrewd businessman returning to his voice. That's entirely up to you, Jackson replied, though I'd recommend reviewing any agreements very carefully before proceeding. Trevor stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. The Prestons need this merger more than we do. Without Whitfield's intervention, Preston Holdings won't last another year. Perhaps, my father acknowledged, rising to face him directly. But I'd rather rebuild honestly than be deceived into my own demise. He turned to Amy. The engagement is your decision, of course. Amy looked at Trevor for a long moment, then slowly removed the large diamond ring from her finger. I think the merger is off. In every sense. Trevor's face flushed with anger. You're making a mistake, all of you. No, I said firmly. For once, we're actually seeing things clearly. As Trevor stormed out, the remaining members of my family seemed suddenly untethered, as if the familiar scripts and power dynamics had been completely rewritten. What happens now? My mother asked, looking lost. I moved to sit beside her, taking her hand gently. Now we try something new. We talk to each other as adults. We acknowledge past hurts instead of using them as weapons. We build relationships based on love and respect, not obligation and control. And if we can't? My father asked quietly. Then, at least we'll have tried, I replied honestly. The foundation will proceed either way. The business offer stands regardless. But the family relationships, those are up to us to rebuild, if we choose to. My father nodded slowly, the gesture containing more humility than I had ever seen from him. I would like to try. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to being a real family. Not the perfect Prestons of social standing and appearance, but something more authentic, more valuable, and ultimately more enduring. 6 months later, I stood in the grand ballroom of what was once simply the Preston Mansion, and was now the Preston Foundation headquarters. The space had been transformed, both physically and symbolically. Where once crystal chandeliers had illuminated society events designed to reinforce status and connections, now warm, modern lighting created an inviting atmosphere for the Foundation's first major fundraiser. Nervous? Jackson asked, appearing at my side with 2 glasses of sparkling water. I accepted one gratefully. A little. It's strange being back here as the host rather than the dutiful daughter. The transformation of the mansion had been extensive but thoughtful. The first floor now housed the Foundation's offices and meeting spaces, while the second floor remained a residence, though significantly reduced in size. The extensive grounds had been partially opened to the public as gardens, with plans for educational programs to utilize the space. You've done something remarkable here, Carly, Jackson said, his eyes reflecting the pride I'd come to treasure. Look around. I did. The room was filled with an eclectic mix of people that would never have gathered under my father's reign. Successful entrepreneurs alongside students, social workers mingling with business leaders, artists engaged in animated conversation with investors, all united by the Foundation's mission: supporting individuals forced to choose between family expectations and personal authenticity. Mrs. Warner? A young woman approached, perhaps 20 years old, with bright eyes and a nervous smile. "I'm Jessica Taylor. I'm one of your first scholarship recipients." "Jessica, it's wonderful to meet you in person." I took both her hands in mine. "How is the engineering program going?" "It's challenging but amazing," she replied, enthusiastically. "My parents still don't really understand why I chose engineering over the family real estate business. But the Foundation's family mediation program has helped us communicate better." "That's exactly what we hoped for," I told her. "Building bridges where there were walls." As Jessica moved on to speak with other Foundation supporters, I caught sight of my parents entering the ballroom. Their arrival still triggered a complex wave of emotions in me. Not the desperate need for approval I once felt, but a cautious hope tempered by the reality of slow healing. The past 6 months had been a careful dance of boundaries and tentative steps toward reconciliation. My father had ultimately accepted Tempest's offer for Preston Holdings, allowing him to retire with dignity while ensuring the company's survival. His role now was primarily advisory, leaving him time to pursue interests long neglected under the pressure of maintaining the family empire. "Your parents are here," Jackson observed. "That's the third Foundation event they've attended." "Progress," I agreed. "Slow but real." My mother spotted us and made her way over, my father following a step behind. She had softened somewhat since that confrontational meeting in our apartment, her sharp edges worn down by the humbling experience of having her worldview so thoroughly challenged. "Carly, everything looks wonderful," she said, genuine admiration in her voice. "The Foundation is becoming quite respected in such a short time." "Thank you, Mom. That means a lot coming from you." And it did, surprisingly. I no longer needed her approval, but I appreciated her support. My father cleared his throat. "The business model is sound, self-sustaining within 3 years if projections hold." It was such a typical James Preston comment, translating emotional value into business terms, that I had to smile. Some things change slowly, if at all. "It's not just about sustainability," I replied gently. "It's about impact. The lives we're changing." He nodded, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. "Yes, of course. The young people I've met through the program are impressive, determined." "Like your daughter," Jackson observed with a smile. My father met his gaze directly. "Yes, exactly like my daughter." "Like your daughter," Jackson observed with a smile. "Have you heard from Amy?" my mother asked, changing the subject. Amy's path since the dissolution of her engagement had been perhaps the most surprising development of all. After returning Trevor's ring, she had taken time to reflect on her own choices and desires, eventually deciding to pursue a long-abandoned interest in environmental science. She was currently in Costa Rica, working on a conservation project, about as far from the Preston expectations as one could imagine. "She called yesterday," I replied. "She's extended her stay for another 3 months. She sounds happy." "She sent us pictures," my mother added, a mix of confusion and pride in her voice. "Working in the jungle, covered in mud, with the biggest smile I've seen on her face since she was a child." "Sometimes we need to step completely outside our comfort zones to find our true selves," Jackson observed. My father's expression suggested he was still processing this new version of his younger daughter, but he nodded thoughtfully. "She's always been stubborn. Once she sets her mind to something." "A Preston family trait," I noted with a smile. A comfortable silence fell between us, neither strained nor artificial. We were finding our way to a new kind of relationship, not perfect, not without boundaries, but honest, in a way it had never been before. The sound of a microphone being adjusted drew our attention to the small stage at the front of the ballroom. Maria, our housekeeper, who had become the Foundation's administrative director, revealing impressive organizational skills that had been hidden in her previous role, was signaling that it was time for the program to begin. "I should go," I said. "Duty calls." My mother surprised me by reaching out to squeeze my hand. "We're proud of you, Carly. What you've built here is extraordinary." The words I had once longed to hear now settled gently around me. Welcome, but no longer essential to my sense of worth or purpose. "Thank you," I replied simply, returning the gesture before moving toward the stage. As I took my place at the podium, looking out over the gathered crowd, I felt a profound sense of rightness. This wasn't the life I had been raised to live, nor was it the rebellion I had initially embraced. It was something entirely new, a path of my own creation, built on the values I had chosen, rather than those I had inherited. "Welcome, everyone, to the first annual Preston Foundation Gala," I began, my voice steady and confident. 2 years ago, I stood in the rain outside this very house, having been rejected by my family for choosing love over obligation. It was the lowest moment of my life, but also the beginning of something powerful. I paused, meeting Jackson's eyes in the crowd. His unwavering support gave me strength, as it always had. That night taught me that sometimes our greatest pain can lead to our most meaningful purpose. The Preston Foundation was born from that experience, not as an act of revenge, but as a commitment to ensuring that no one has to choose between family acceptance and personal authenticity. Across the room, I saw faces nodding in understanding, some with tears in their eyes, people who had experienced similar rejections, who knew the pain of conditional love. In our first 6 months, we've provided 37 scholarships to students pursuing paths their families don't understand or support. We've facilitated 15 family mediation programs, helping to rebuild relationships that seemed irreparably broken. And we've created a community where people can find acceptance exactly as they are. I gestured to the transformed space around us. This mansion once represented status and exclusion. Today, it stands for something entirely different: the possibility of transformation, of growth, of creating beauty from pain. Just as this building has been reimagined, so too can our relationships and communities be rebuilt on foundations of authenticity and respect. As I continued the presentation, introducing scholarship recipients and sharing stories of reconciliation, I was struck by how far we had all come. My father, once so rigid in his expectations, now listened intently to a young man describing his journey from family rejection to self-acceptance. My mother, who had valued appearances above all else, engaged warmly with guests from all walks of life. After the formal program concluded, I found myself in a quiet corner with Jackson, taking a moment to absorb the evening's success. "I keep thinking about that night in the rain," I admitted. "How completely hopeless everything felt. If you hadn't arrived when you did, you would have found your way," Jackson said with absolute certainty. "That's who you are, Carly. You may have been knocked down, but you were never going to stay down." "Maybe," I conceded, "but I'm grateful I didn't have to find out." He smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "Do you remember what you said to me on our first date? When I asked why someone from your background would be interested in a self-made guy with no connections?" I laughed softly at the memory. "I said that names and backgrounds don't define who we are. Our choices and actions do." "Exactly. You already knew who you were. Even then, you just needed the freedom to become that person fully." Looking around at what we had built together, not just the foundation, but our partnership, our expanded definition of family, our commitment to creating meaning from difficulty, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. "Sometimes rejection is actually redirection," I said thoughtfully. "Being kicked out of this house was painful, but it led me exactly where I needed to go." As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, I found myself standing on the mansion's front steps, the same spot where I had once stood soaking wet and heartbroken. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Instead of rain and despair, I was surrounded by warmth and purpose, by a community of my own creation, rather than one I had been born into. My father approached as I was saying goodbye to the last few guests, hovering somewhat awkwardly until we were alone. "Carly," he began, uncharacteristic hesitation in his voice. "There's something I've wanted to say to you for some time now." I turned to face him fully, giving him my complete attention. I'm listening. That night, at Amy's engagement party, when they were escorting you out, he paused, visibly struggling. When I turned my back, it wasn't because I didn't care. It was because I couldn't bear to watch what was happening. I knew it was wrong, but I was too proud, too stubborn to intervene. The admission clearly cost him greatly. James Preston did not acknowledge mistakes easily. I have regretted that moment every day since, he continued. Not because of what happened with the company or the mansion, but because I failed you as a father when you needed me most. The simple, heartfelt apology was more meaningful than any grand gesture could have been. It acknowledged the specific hurt without excuses or qualifications. Thank you for telling me that, I said softly. It means a lot to hear you say it. He nodded, emotion making further words difficult. After a moment, he asked, do you think we can ever truly move past it? All of it? I considered the question carefully. I think we're already moving past it, day by day. Not by forgetting or pretending it didn't happen, but by building something better in its place. I met his eyes directly. I don't need a perfect family, Dad, just an honest one. For the first time in my memory, my father reached out and pulled me into a genuine embrace, not the formal, perfunctory hugs of society events, but something real and vulnerable. I returned it, feeling the walls between us continue to crumble. Later that night, as Jackson and I drove home to our apartment, the city lights creating a glittering pathway before us, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with external validation and everything to do with internal alignment. What are you thinking about? Jackson asked, glancing over at me. About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, if we're brave enough to keep moving forward, I replied. That night in the rain felt like an ending, but it was really the beginning of something much more meaningful. He reached across to take my hand. Endings and beginnings are often the same thing, just viewed from different perspectives. Very philosophical, Mr. Warner, I teased. I have my moments, Mrs. Warner, he replied with a smile. As we drove through the night toward home, our real home, the one we had built together, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. From the moment we met, through the family rejection, to the confrontation in the rain and everything that had followed, each step had been necessary to create the life we now lived. The Preston name would always be part of my history, but it no longer defined my worth or dictated my choices. I had found something far more valuable than inheritance or status. The freedom to live authentically, to love without conditions, and to transform pain into purpose. Sometimes, being kicked out in the rain is exactly what we need to find our way home. Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own happiness? What would you have done in Carly's situation? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that sometimes rejection leads to our greatest redirection. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I wish you the courage to always choose authenticity, even when it's the harder path.